Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian Aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. I am joined now as ever by my loyal friend and best co-host, Soot, the Air Service's kind of comfort dog. He's been very much needed the past week. I'm also joined by my co-host, Jake Nelson. Jake, say hello.
Hello.
I knew exactly that would be the response as well. Now, before we get into the normal shout-outs, I have something of a public service announcement. I was told by one of our producers on this show, Damon. What's Damon's name again? It's like Damon
the terrible Damon. He crawled up from the depths below in the smell of sulphur and brimstone.
Yeah, anyway, so he has given me an update on like the success of this show. And I've always been quite candid that this show is rubbish, like absolute dross, and people should hang their heads in shame for listening to this nonsense. But unfortunately,
it's a great way to attract new listeners by insulting the current ones.
Well, you'd think it was a bad way, but it transpired. But the more I hate on this show, the more popular it gets. So in the last year, or in the last 365 days, we've had 2,804 like watch hours on YouTube. That's just on my YouTube, which is a lot of time to listen to nonsense. We have found out the average age is 25 to 34 of our listeners. That's nearly 60%. So we're a hit among the Gen Zers. 10%
It'd be sort of millennials as well, I'd say there.
Yeah. Also 10% females. Like that a bit higher, to be honest. If you do know any women who are into aviation, tell them about the show. We need to get those stats up. Interestingly, extraordinarily, this show is now a global success. 50% of our watchers, or whatever they're called, are in Australia. 10% in the United States, your favourite place. 2% from His Majesty's Green and Pleasant Lands. And a further 2% from Germany. So a huge shout out to any Germans watching this. However, and this is where we are, like, we're clearly out of touch, 92% of our watchers are not subscribers. You know these idiots on YouTube who do that whole kind of down thing? And they're like, oh, subscribe now.
Yeah, click the link in there. Click the link in the doobly-doo.
Yeah, and I've always refused to do that. Transpires those idiots might be onto something, because actually that stuff works, and that we've not been doing that has clearly been hurting us. So it's good that 92% of people are just like seeking us out without subscribing, but the more subscribers we get, the better. So I'm not going to do that stupid pointy thing for people.
Hey guys, don't forget to smash that like button and ring that bell to get notifications on when we're coming up next.
Yeah, well, on that note, so we were going gangbusters, like huge success week after week, getting better. But apparently, the episode When America Sneezes, which is when you did one of some extraordinary US diatribe, the average time people watch was 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, people just cut off at that point. So that is literal audience feedback that says people aren't into this. And he's got some more rants coming up later as well. But essentially, this isn't working. However, significantly, we are on 2,804 watch hours, but if we get to 3,000 watch hours, at that point, we get monetized. We get money. So at this point, the cash is rolling in.
Rolling in.
Well, yeah.
I believe that that episode may also have been the one with the most views or the most listens across our podcast network, Adam, the When America Sneezes episode.
Are you trying to find this? It's like you can spin anything with stats. Like it was just a bad stat.
I mean, lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at our figures here for that month. When America Sneezes was our top downloaded episode at 999, followed by Lord of the Wings: Return of the King, 985. Excellent title, if I do say so myself. Then we had Pay on Delay, a Win-Win, our interview with Greg Foran on 953. And we had now this was probably just because it was last week, but we did interview Professor Andrew Kornberg from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne about his upcoming solo flight around Australia to raise money for children with rare neurological conditions. So that is the lowest ranking for the month, but that's probably because we put it up with 3 days to go in the month. So,
yeah, exactly.
If you haven't listened to that episode, go over and give it a listen. Great guy, great mission, and support him as he flies around Australia to raise money for those kids.
Yeah, excellent. But the bottom line is, if we get another 196 watch hours, we are filthy rich, or at least there'd be like, I don't know, $1 or $2 extra will come away. So that is basically...
It can get a new collar for soot.
Yeah, exactly. And I will 100% give you... I'll look down the barrel of a camera here. I'll 100% spend any of that money on soot. But so whatever we need to do to get there, tell your friends, or just maybe even if you don't like the episode, just keep it running in the background. Go do something else. You know, you probably got unlimited internet at home. But we need 196 watch hours. But that's over the course of a year. So it's not like we just get 196 more. We need to see like an uptick. So we pass that threshold. Internally, I've also learned we've been losing out to what they call the SPI show, which sounds like some kind of infection. It's actually, was it Smart Property Investor or something? It's one of the brands, and our parent company.
The
they
Property
run.
Investment Podcast Network is the official name here.
It's not. Boo! I don't like it. The presenters are rubbish. One of them, I think, is French as well. I don't understand a word she says. Generally, it's not great content. It's really poor.
The age-old enmity is coming once again to the fore.
Yeah, but basically, it's not great content. So we need to get some money in, firstly. Secondly, we need to beat SPI because I can't have that hanging over us. So if you are into property, stop being into property, start getting into aeroplanes. If you are watching Match Show, stop watching Match Show. If you know anyone that's into it, just say stop watching that show immediately and come to Australian Aviation. This is not going to go down well internally. I don't care. Anyway, that's it. We need more viewers, listeners, watchers, whatever they are. On the note, though, of the show being rubbish, I received a personal LinkedIn message. I won't read out her surname because I didn't tell her I was going to read it out. So just the first name's probably fine. It's from Lauren. And she puts the subject, Plane of Thrones Unites. And this is obviously for those who aren't regular watchers, relates to the fact that I've always called it the Plane of Thrones, whereas you say, Jake, it should be the Game of Planes,
which makes the most sense.
So for people aren't aware of the in-joke, she's clearly coming down on my side. She says, hi, Adam, would love to connect and follow along your Plane of Thrones journey. Enjoying the podcast series with Jake and think it's cutting-edge content Australia didn't know we needed. Excellently put.
Yeah.
Agree with the official market research. Dial up the nonsense. I'm a regular listener. Keep up the great work.
Hopefully see you at the Oz Aviation Awards as well, says Lauren.
Yeah, he's got it from Tim too. Thank you very much, Lauren. That's very much appreciated.
Very, very wonderful and correct opinions, except for the Plane of Thrones part. It is clearly Game of Planes. Actually, we can do polls on YouTube. We can do polls. We can get our production team maybe to do a poll on YouTube on whether it should be Game of Planes or Plane of Thrones. And then, once and for all, we can decide whether or not it is that. And then one or the other of us will ignore whatever result comes out of the poll inevitably.
Right, okay. Yeah, maybe. Right, so that's it for my shout outs for the week. Have you got anything to
we've had a comment on YouTube on the podcast from a couple of weeks back. I was talking about my collection of Casa pins that I lamentably did not complete at Avalon. Alamin Dewan 12 said, sounds like Jake's collection is now a national crisis. Maybe start a crowdfunding campaign to complete it. It is, and we should start a Kickstarter or something to complete it. But I will say, if you were planning to send us any balloon pins, please don't send us any balloon pins. I got it wrong. The one I'm missing is the helicopter.
He actually wanted us. I think he wanted us to do like an emergency podcast, whatever they call it.
No. I just wanted it to cut that bit out of the podcast.
Yeah, you basically
when I got it
wanted
wrong.
our team to spend like 10 minutes editing it because you got the reference to your pin wrong, which is not in any way professional. Right?
Since when have we been in any way professional?
That's true.
Speaking of things that are professional and that will go down well internally, we did have an email from one of our listeners, Brian, who and he raised some points that I do want to address. He said, "G'day, Jake. Just listened to the Greg Foran interview. That was very good. Thank you, Brian. However, you cannot help yourself bashing Qantas and DJ Trump, TDS, which for those who are not up on American politics stands for Trump Derangement Syndrome. Please keep your political opinions out of the show. It's about aviation." I agree. As someone who has a deep knowledge of B747 heavy and line maintenance and VIP aircraft, Dubai Royal Air Wing, Royal Queen's Flight and more as a licensed engineer with clearance to work on those AC aircraft, where did you get data that take nearly 4 years to refurbish the Qatar BBJ to Air Force One? And the cost, I would be interested to read that data. I guess it was, Democrats say it will cost $1 billion or more to convert the plane to Air Force One standards. Political hit job. Looking forward to your reply. Regards, Brian. Well, Adam, I do want to reply to this. I do want to respond to this.
I agree with you, Brian, by the way, but go on.
Trader. I do want to respond to this, Adam,
you need to have your moment.
Because we do need to dial up the nonsense here, I think. But look, it's you may even time me, Adam. You may even time me if you wish to see exactly how long I go on about this. But I do want to respond to Brian's comments in good faith, because I want to engage with our listeners and start a dialogue here. So. If you may time me if you wish, or you may.
Yeah, let's time you.
Yeah,
so we've got here. Right, go on.
Do you have like a stopwatch?
Yeah,
function?
I started it.
Okay.
I'm using it every time now.
So, first of all, Brian, I do not wish to doubt your expertise on someone who has a deep knowledge of line maintenance and on these VIP aircraft. However, one must note that Air Force One is not the same as a normal VIP aircraft. It requires a lot more work on it to bring it up to the national security standards required for the President of the United States. For example, shielded electronic systems to resist nuclear blasts, upgraded communications systems, and anti-missile defenses alongside a raft of other upgrades, which I believe would be classified. Regardless, where I got that information was from a Forbes article that cited a couple of aviation experts. One of them was an analyst whose name is his name is Richard Abulafia. He's an aerospace consultant with Aerodynamic Advisory. He pointed out these large ostentatious planes are a security risk. He estimated that it would take about 4 to 5 years to completely refit this 747-8 to the standards that would be required of Air Force One, because in part it would need to be stripped down to the rivets, swept for bugs, and have all of these upgrades installed. Something which Boeing, which is building these two planes on a clean sheet, it's building them themselves, is already doing, and could probably get done a little quicker if a few restrictions are relaxed. Boeing, it has been pointed out elsewhere, is also doing this on a fixed price contract, meaning it would probably cost less to the US taxpayer, given that any cost overruns incurred by Boeing would be paid for by Boeing and its shareholders, not the American taxpayer. So it would be cheaper, these analysts are saying, to just stick with the original plan for Boeing rather than completely refitting these Qatari 747 to service Air Force One, particularly considering that if it got donated to the Trump Presidential Library afterwards, it would have to have all of these upgrades removed.
We're coming up to 2 minutes now. Even I'm bored. I'll wrap this up.
I also want to address it says, please keep your political opinions out of the show. It's about aviation. I will point, Adam, this is my time. First of all, I doubt you would be saying that if I was saying that Trump was the greatest thing to happen to aviation and should have the fifth face on Mount Rushmore. But more importantly, by and large, everything that I've said about Donald Trump on this show has related to the context of aviation. For example, the tariffs, the trade wars, the cuts to the FAA, the Qatari 747. So I have tried to keep any discussion about Trump, regardless of my personal opinions, which are highly negative of him, about aviation and in an aviation context. So I will address Trump when it is in an aviation context, but I won't be, for example, talking about any of the other myriad ethical concerns about his administration. Stop the clock, Adam.
Wrap it up. Right.
I hope that addresses your concerns, Brian.
That's 2 minutes, 45 minutes of my life I'll never get back. Right, well, you've had your piece now. You've said your piece. You got any other shout-outs? Not about the United States or Trump or anything like that?
I feel abandoned and betrayed by you, Adam.
Good. Right, let's talk about the week's news. Has there been any news? Well, actually, we've got 2 weeks. News.
It's been a couple of weeks since we didn't have our space summit last week. Which was a good event, wasn't it, Adam?
It was an amazing event, actually. We do moonlight doing space as well, and the actual speaker list was absolutely extraordinary. We had my favourite guest we have actually kind of zoomed in from the US, Dr. Kelly Fast, and she is NASA's head of planetary defence, the greatest job title ever. Her job is literally that if an asteroid is coming to us, she's in charge of sorting out the situation. And if you may remember, there's the YR 2024 or whatever city-killing asteroid that everybody was talking about at the start of the year, which at one point had, I think, a 3% chance of hitting Earth. And this was the first time that her department was tasked with warning the world. There's a formal warning system, and obviously then kind of getting in place potential solutions to this. And I asked her, what was it like the moment you discovered this? What was it like in the office? And she was like, it was exciting and terrifying all at the same time. But she was an absolutely remarkable woman. Really, really, really cool to have her. We have the CEO of Hokkaido Airport in Japan. We had the CEO of Virginia Spaceport in the US. We had two CEOs of local spaceports here in Australia. We also had, which was amazing, a panel with 3 Australian astronauts all together. And we think this is the first time so many Australian astronauts have kind of been in a room together. And we had this panel with some school kids as well. You could ask them any question you wanted. I was hoping for some kind of like chat like, does poo smell in space or other stuff? But they actually asked really sensible questions. If anything, I had to dumb it down and interject sometimes. But that was with Catherine Bennell-Pegg, Eric Phillips, who just recently returned from space all of 6 weeks ago, and the legend Paul Scully-Powers, Australia's first astronaut. Thank you all for all the astronauts that come along. At the awards, we have the awards at the end of the summit. I was actually sat in between 2 astronauts, which is probably the greatest seating arrangement I'll ever have in my life. The whole thing was brilliant. Anyone that came along, and there would have been a lot of people in the aviation industry come along as well. Thank you so much for coming. One of the highlights of my career. We all worked very hard on it, but it was lovely to put on, so thank you very much.
We also had former Prime Minister Scott Morrison speaking.
Yeah, we did as well. So he is now the CEO of Space Centre Australia, which is like a proposed spaceport, or an in-development spaceport in far north Queensland. So he came along. He's actually really passionate about space, and he's very passionate about STEM. Whatever your political views of him, his time in office, he put a lot of money into the space industry, which has kind of subsequently been pulled out. But he's a very good kind of figurehead for the whole industry. I get the impression what happened is he left Prime Minister, had a year off, and he's kind of like, what do I want to do with my life that I'm passionate about? He's passionate about space. So thank you very much. I'm going to call him ScoMo. Thank you very much, ScoMo, for coming along. He was great. Right, anyway, let's talk about the news. Go on, let's actually do some... It's been more drivel than normal for the last sort of 15 minutes. Just give some like hard-hitting aviation discussion.
Well, I think we should start in Newcastle, Adam.
Go
on. Newcastle has...
That's Newcastle in Australia, right? Not the actual
Newcastle. In Australia. This is the Australian Aviation Podcast, so you take pains to remind me. Newcastle Airport, just north of Sydney, has come storming out with a couple of big announcements over the past week that have, I think, been a fair time in the making, because they've been talking about these for a while. The first announcement, and this was last week, was that Qantas Link is going to be flying transcontinental services. It's going to be flying between Newcastle and Perth using its A319s. Qantas Link also will be bringing services back from Perth to Hobart. But this was a route to Newcastle that attracted high levels of interest among the residents of the Hunter. And you would expect it would as well, because if you live in the Newcastle area currently and you want to go to Perth, you have to go down to Sydney to get there.
Yeah.
So you have to go, a couple of hours drive out of your way. You have to go into Sydney, and then it's a couple of hours drive, or, train and then taxi and buses and whatever, all the way back up to Newcastle. So if you want to go to Perth from Newcastle, starting in September, on the 8th of September, it will be a lot easier because Qantas Link will be flying direct using its A319s. I think these are some of the A319s that it picked up ex-Spirit Airlines last year. The other big announcement that came out of Newcastle, and this broke today, June the 3rd, as we're recording this, is that Newcastle Airport is going to see its first ongoing international flights. Now, it's had, I believe, seasonal services to New Zealand before, but this is a year-round service that Jetstar is launching to Bali. So it's going to start on the 21st of October using the A321neo LRs, and that's, again, going to cut the need for any residents of Newcastle and the Hunter to go down to Sydney if they want a holiday in Bali. And, of course, they can connect through Bali, if they so choose to other destinations served by other airlines. So Newcastle Airport, it's got its international terminal opening in August, and it's really gunning for this position as at least a semi-major or reasonably important regional centre for both domestic and international travel.
It's kind of, at the moment, Newcastle is sort of in a no man's land for international travel, like you say there, if you want to travel to a lot of faraway places, you have to go to Sydney, but actually getting to Sydney is a bit of a trek. It's not just getting into the city, it's then getting to the airport. So it does make absolute sense. Was it 2 or 3 years ago? I'm sure I remember covering this story when they did the big runway upgrade there, which was a really, really big deal. It's actually starting to bear fruit. Newcastle has potential, I think, over time to be a really significant New South Wales airport. It could be like a kind of Gold Coast sort of hub there. So it makes absolute sense. It's also, I think, in Australia, we can fall into the trap sometimes, particularly in the media. We can fall into the trap of just thinking Australia is these major capital cities, whereas actually the vast majority of Australians don't live there. And there will probably be millions of people in that kind of Hunter region catchment area, for which this has been a major change, major change for them. What it will also do is that kind of bonza-like effect of encouraging or stimulating new demand that may not have been there previously. So it's easy to think, all this will cut down people's travel time. Yes, it will, but it will also enable people to do trips they perhaps wouldn't have done otherwise. So this is kind of new stimulus coming into the industry. So I think it's really, really good news.
Yeah, exactly. And, it could as well serve... If people from Sydney don't mind the trek, it could serve as another hub or an alternative perhaps to Sydney Airport for people who are wanting to avoid congestion at Sydney, or maybe shopping around for a cheaper fare that they might get out of Newcastle, or to destinations that they can get to from Newcastle. It could be that Newcastle, as you say, becomes sort of a Gold Coast. I will say they probably would need to update the transport links, because I don't think there is a direct train service out to Newcastle Airport. I think there's buses, but you'd probably need more robust public transport out there. But Newcastle Airport, could position itself very well as kind of even sort of a third airport for this sort of whole Sydney-Newcastle region once, WSI opens up at the end of next year. And if you don't want to wait for WSI and you want to, find an alternative to Sydney now, well, starting in October, you'll be able to fly to Bali from Newcastle.
And one of the big issues we've been speaking about for the last couple of years is one of the biggest problems in the Australian aviation market is this idea of monopoly airports. Effectively, each city has one, if they're lucky, one major airport. Each state effectively has one major airport. The more of these secondary airports we can have flying international routes or doing more ambitious routes, the better it's going to be from everyone, because we want to get to a situation now where airlines are kind of shopping around a little bit more. That brings fares down, gives consumers a lot more choice. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these things moving forward. But I think it's a very, very positive mood, not just for Newcastle, but for the industry as a whole. Right, what's up next?
Well, up next, Adam, we should probably address the matter of the Huey.
Oh, God, yeah. Actually, what I was also told by Damon the Devilish, whatever you're calling him.
The terrible Damon.
The terrible Damon is that we need to, do shout-outs of things coming in advance. Like cliffhangers that they do on the TV show. So maybe I will end this segment and say, we're going to come back. And when we do come back, we're going to unveil the winner of a Huey. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, welcome back. So we ended on that extraordinary cliffhanger.
Seemed like it took forever, Adam.
Well, yeah, you're making a joke about the fact that in our studio that we just paused for a few seconds. That's let's hope there is an ad break was put in there, or there is an advert. Anyway, yes. So it's the Huey Award for the most reliable airline. Talk us a little bit through the recent history of a Huey before you talk about this month's winner.
Bumped the microphone there. The recent history of the Huey is that it bumped to the microphone. But before that, the Huey has for the past few months been dominated by Virgin Australia and Vara. Vara was the title holder, the current title holder as of sort of this month or last month, because Vara had a full month of no cancellations whatsoever, which is extraordinary. And Vara has again had a full month of no cancellations. Which is once more extraordinary. Before that, we had Virgin Australia as a whole win it for a couple of months. But just going through the on-time reliability data that was released late last month, because we didn't get to address this last week, obviously, due to the Space Summit. We had Virgin again has beaten the Qantas group for on-time arrivals, departures, and cancellations, which its Chief Operations Officer Chris Snook said demonstrated its focus on improving reliability and performance. In fact, he said in April, we achieved our best performance on-time performance result in more than 2 years, with 84.4% of flights departing on time, while operating the highest number of daily domestic flights of any major airline. Probably a bit cheeky there, because Qantas, Jetstar, Virgin is Qantas has Qantas and QantasLink and Jetstar, and Virgin mainly just has Virgin and Vara. says last month, fewer than 1 in 100 flights were cancelled, demonstrating that commitment to safely performing on time and putting our guests first is really paying off and industry leading. So congratulations to Virgin on that. And Vara, again, did not cancel any of its 165 flights in April.
So they've had 3 months consecutively without cancelling flights.
No, Vara 2 months consecutively without cancelling flights, which is a pretty decent achievement.
I think that deserves a round of applause, actually. That is really, really, you can't argue with that. Whoever's in charge of the Vara operation, I doff my cap to you. That is exceptional work. That is like you've gone to an exam and you've got every single question correct for two exams in a trial. That's really well done. Well done anyway.
Now in a twist, Adam.
Oh, hello.
We're now turning to our regional airlines.
Hello.
Regional airlines aside from Vara, because it is true that Vara cancelled no flights. It also operated very, very few flights. You know, Vara doesn't operate a whole lot of flights. Now, Skytrans and Hinterland, which are the two, aside from Rex, the two other major regional airlines that participate in this BITRA data. Skytrans and Hinterland both had on-time departures percentage of 89.9%. For the month of April, which is very impressive from both. And Skytrans had 89.9% on-time arrivals as well, Hinterland 84.6%. However, Hinterland had the second lowest cancellation rate of any of the airlines participating at just 0.5%.
That's probably like one flight, I'd imagine. Or like maybe 2 flights.
It would certainly not be many. You know, 1 in 200 flights essentially got cancelled. Whereas Skytrans cancelled 17.8% of flights,
right?
Which is a lot more.
Yeah.
Not knocking Skytrans, of course. Skytrans did a brilliant job with its on-time arrivals and on-time departures.
We've also had a lot of wild weather across the country.
That is true. That is true. However. Because of this sort of all-rounder performance, great on-time arrivals, great on-time departures, and really, really low cancellations, I am actually giving the Huey this month to Hinterland.
Congratulations, Hinterland.
Congratulations, Hinterland. A former joint winner with Skytrans, now the winner of the Huey for the month of April in its own right.
No asterisks against it this time.
It beat Virgin Group. It beat Qantas Group. It beat basically everyone but Skytrans. It beat basically everyone but Skytrans on a single measure.
Excellent.
And everyone but Vara on a single measure. So for a solid all-round performance, it's Hinterland.
Well, congratulations. We'll be selling the replica Huey in the post for you there so that you can put that on your shelf.
Probably just to take a picture of it, I guess.
Yeah, well, not really. It's just a joke.
Yeah.
Right, come on. We've done with Huey now. We've got some serious, cutting-edge, hard-hitting aviation news.
All right, you want hard-hitting, cutting-edge aviation news?
Sid wants that.
I believe him. Let's talk about Boeing.
Oh, he's...
Boeing has reached a non-prosecution agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice and will not be facing a felony fraud trial over the crashes of Lion Air 610 in 2018 and Ethiopian flights 302 on the 10th of March, despite last year saying that it would plead guilty. So Boeing will be required to pay or invest more than $1.1 billion US dollars, including a $444.5 million fund for victims' families, a $445 million fund for safety and compliance programs, and a criminal fine. And the victims' families are not happy, or at least some of the victims' families are not happy. They've called it a sweetheart deal. It said they're coddling corporate criminals. Paul Castle, who is a pro bono lawyer representing some of these families, said, quote, "This kind of non-prosecution deal is unprecedented and obviously wrong for the deadliest corporate crime in U.S. history. My families will object and hope to convince the court to reject it." Javier De Luis, who lost his sister in the Ethiopian crash, said the Department of Justice is walking away from any pretense to seek justice from the victims of the 737 MAX crashes. He says the message sent by this action to companies around the country is don't worry about making your products safe for your customers. Even if you kill them, just pay a small fine and move on. Boeing has repeatedly shown itself incapable of changing their ways on their own. And Catherine Berthet of France, who lost her 28-year-old daughter in the Ethiopian crash, said the U.S. government has blind faith in Boeing to the point of letting it get away with the murder of 346 people. So harsh words and strong words from the families of those victims. because Boeing is essentially getting out of it without criminal convictions.
But they've already been sort of forced to. They were found, if not guilty, they were found that their safety standards were, or the checks weren't up to scratch, and they were forced to pay an enormous fine of how many billions was it a couple of years ago or a few years ago. But I suppose the point of the families is they want actual justice in court for people dying, which I completely understand.
And basically, I think the charges were around defrauding the United States.
Yeah.
And Boeing is a major defense contractor, and if it was received felony convictions for defrauding the United States and killing a bunch of people, that would probably endanger a lot of its standing with the US government. So that's probably what the families have been seeking in terms of justice for these people who died.
Yeah, and I can completely see why they would want to go down this route as well, because they would look at the previous kind of fine that they were given as a kind of administrative sort of slap on the wrist, when they want to see kind of actual court-led justice. And you've also got to feel for them, like they've lost family members, and a lot of them would have been in the prime of their life. This isn't like when people get old and they sadly die. This is a shock. It happened twice in sort of similar circumstances, so I can completely understand that, and I can completely understand their complete rage over it.
Yeah, Catherine Berthay also said, quote, by deciding not to prosecute Boeing and not to take it to court, the government is sending a message to the public that big companies are above the law and justice, even when they kill. Moreover, this NPA can be seen as a message that the families and the government can be bribed to forget about crime. The point that they're making is this, big, victims' families fund is basically a payoff.
Yeah. And I can completely see. I can see why they want justice, and they probably want people in prison for this, because if you're at a very senior level and you are knowledgeable about these kind of underlying failings, then you deserve to be held to account. So I can completely see that from their point of view. Do you know if this can sort of, and I'm sure I've messed up the legal thing here, can this be like appealed? Is this the end of it? Of the road?
Well, I think it's. The families are looking to the judge, I think, to reject that deal.
Yeah.
So, like Judge Reed O'Connor, I think is the one who's overseeing this. And so I think the families want the court to say, no, this deal cannot go ahead. We're going to a trial. So whether or not how likely that is I guess kind of up in the air. But yeah, it's a pretty. It's a pretty sobering thought, really, when you think about it, that, Boeing might get away from this with, as you say, again, okay, pretty hefty fines, but essentially, as you say, an administrative slap on the wrist.
Okay, let's move on to another story. What have we got up next?
More sad news, unfortunately, Adam. The cancellation of the Gold Coast Pacific Air Show this year.
Yes, that is very sad news. Because is it Kevin Elliott. I will get to your chat with him in a moment. I chatted to him 2 or 3 years ago now when he was setting it up, and he's a fantastic guy. And he had this incredible ambition that was basically that if you want to get people involved you want to get people excited about aviation, you need to take aviation to the people rather than kind of, I say, forcing them to trudge out into an airfield. And like, as much as we like going to Avalon, it is a long trek to get up there and it's a long trek to get back. You've got to be really into aviation to do that. If you have it in the Gold Coast, if you have it on the beach, you bring in kind of new business, you bring in new fans, you inspire new people. I went to the first year, which was absolutely fantastic. And again, it was full of lots of young people that potentially wouldn't have gone to an air show before. So it's a fantastic idea. They had a second year last year, which I think was, they bettered it on the first year in terms of kind of ticket sales. What they were also doing as well, as the years were going on, the plan was to expand it down the beach. So it's become a bigger and bigger event. One of the things I was told is that when the weekend of a Gold Coast Air Show is actually kind of the best weekend of a year, or the busiest weekend of a year for things like hotel bookings, for bars, clubs, restaurants, whatever. The whole area gets energized by it. So it was an absolutely brilliant idea that kind of succeeded against all odds, particularly given that they were planning this thing during COVID, when he had to kind of not shut down, but lay off and stand down a lot of his staff in the US during that. So they kind of overcome all the odds. Unfortunately, though, they've been beaten by the Australian weather, haven't they?
Yeah. So first of all, what's happened was that there was significant erosion on the beach at Surfers Paradise following ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. And that washed away quite a lot of sand. It lost since that storm. The Gold Coast has lost more than 4 million cubic meters of sand. The beach level at Surfers has dropped by around 2 meters. There are sand cliffs up to 6 meters high. Now, the Gold Coast, the council has been trying to restore that beach. But the trouble that they've been running into is that there have been huge king tides and huge swells that have been really not conducive to bringing. You put a bunch of sand there, and then the next king tide or the next huge swell washes it all away. And so it basically got to the point. And Kevin Elliott was saying to me, I had a chat with him. It basically got to the point where they had to either accept a compromised air show, so one that wasn't going to be as good as they wanted to put on. They might have had to move it and, rearrange airspace and dates, and then they'd have to, go through CASA, and they might have to, cut some acts, and, they might have to have it in a less nice location or whatever. It's either accept a compromised air show for this year or chop it and do and put all the focus on making next year as good as possible. And that's what they've done. They're looking forward to 2026. And Kevin Elliott was saying, we want to make 2026 what 2025 should have been.
And I do completely understand that. I would also say, to their credit, that they've given quite a bit of notice for this. So it would have happened, in a few months' time? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, they're giving everyone a refund if they want them all, but they can transfer a ticket for next year. Clearly, if you've already booked a hotel or whatever, there's not much you can do about that. That obviously people can go to the Gold Coast and have a good time.
They've been working with their accommodation partners. I think Accor is their main accommodation partner, to basically allow people to transfer their bookings to next year, or to get people to get the bookings transferred, or to get possibly refunds for the guests. One thing that they're doing is, in terms of the tickets themselves, you can either, request a full refund, in which case that's what you will get, or you can do nothing, in which case your ticket will be rolled over to next year's show. So you will have a ticket to the 2026 show, which will be, which has been rescheduled to...
It's coming. We don't want any dead air. I'll just keep
which has been rescheduled to the 14th to the 16th of August next year. It was supposed to be the 15th to the 17th this year. So 14 to 16 next year is when the next Gold Coast Pacific Air Show is.
And I would say, so one of the things I read separately is they have these kind of machines that they put on the beach to kind of to fly the sand from further out back onto the main beach. But unfortunately, there's only so much you can do with Mother Nature, particularly when what they needed was a spell of sensible weather for the few months or whatever after that in order to help them to do that. But we have had, even here in New South Wales, in fact, all around the East Coast, this kind of wild, unpredictable weather for the last few months, which has made it nearly impossible. So I completely see why they're doing it. I think they've tried to be as decent as possible. I remember somebody in the office was like, oh, is that actually the reason? But I think it really is the reason, because they've gone into quite a lot of detail. It does make sense, and you can understand why there's a lot of technical things that the average punter may not understand that would make putting on that show much more difficult. If they were to have to then move it, which would change airspace, regulations and what have you, and they put on a significantly worse show, that would damage the air show. That wouldn't be good for the people that that book tickets. So it is a shame, but I do completely understand it. I think, hopefully it will be back next year, and hopefully they get some good weather. But it's Australia, it's crazy weather. That's just what the nation's about. So
droughts, flooding, rain, so on.
Yeah.
Only exacerbated, of course, by the looming threat of climate change.
Yes, excellent. So we just spoke before about the troubles that the Gold Coast Air Show, the Gold Coast Pacific Air Show, has had. What's up next on news?
Well, we've had some, I guess, mixed news, some good news, some bad news for Qantas. In the latest Roy Morgan research, the brand trust and distrust thing that they do every quarter. Now, Qantas remains the 5th least trusted brand in Australia. So it is behind Woolworths, Coles, Facebook / Meta, and Optus. Optus has really taken a beating since that big cyber disruption earlier this year. So it's still among the top 10 most distrusted brands in Australia. However, overall levels of distrust are decreasing, according to Roy Morgan. So, its position is unchanged, but people are starting to trust Qantas a bit more. There was a huge drop in its public image after COVID, with the Ghost Flights lawsuit, with the resignation of Alan Joyce. Then we had the book The Chairman's Lounge by Joe Aston that came out last year, which caused another bit of a drop. But according to Michelle Levine, the CEO of Roy Morgan, Qantas is clearly on the upswing. She says, Quote, the recovery of Qantas is following a trajectory that aligns closely with Roy Morgan's benchmark recovery rate, showing a near consistent upward trend. Despite a temporary dip in March 2025, Qantas's recovery has remained largely on track. By the way, the remaining brands in the top 10 least trusted are, in order, Telstra, Temu, Twitter/X, News Corp, and Tesla. Tesla's taken a real beating. People don't like Tesla, which is all I will say about that.
I would say that. So, firstly, it's kind of good news for Qantas in that they've had a lot better performance generally in terms of reliability, etc. And it does feel that the new CEO has really got to grips with the nitty gritty of what's going wrong. The problem they're going to have is that turning around your reputation when you've taken such a kicking does take a long time. And there's an element that a certain amount of time needs to pass before the country can kind of fall back in love with Qantas. So it's always going to take a lot of time. What's interesting when you look at those list of the kind of least trusted brands is that they're the ones that people have kind of personal experience with every day. So whether it's your internet, whether it's your flying, they're the ones, the most kind of customer facing ones. So it's kind of understandable why that would happen. Nonetheless, I think Qantas is quietly seeming to be turning it round. So I think that's positive for them. The nation will always have a long-term love affair for Qantas. So they're only ever going to be out of love for a while. But I think it's going to take another couple of years before people move on from a kind of post-COVID chaos and also from all the kind of redundancies, etc. that happened.
Something else, by the way, that Brian touched on in his email. He mentioned Trump, but he also mentioned Qantas. He said that I bash Qantas, that we bash Qantas. We're not in the business of bashing Qantas. No, we're not in the business of bashing Qantas. When Qantas does well, we say it.
Yeah.
When Qantas does poorly, we say it.
Impartial journalism.
We are impartial. And I think we had the discussion the other week about I was talking about the Qantas flight back from Brisbane as opposed to the Air New Zealand flight that I took the other week. There was nothing wrong with the Qantas flight back from Brisbane. It was fine. It's just the plane was a little old. The plane was a little old and clapped out, and it's kind of when you get on, a Qantas domestic flight, you're not really sure if you're going to get on, a nicer, newer plane or an older and more clapped out plane. And unfortunately, that's the kind of plane that I got. So it's fine. It's a premium carrier. It does the job. It's just and I think the new planes, like the new A321 XLRs, are probably going to help.
Yeah.
Because they're nice new planes that are going to be nicer and newer than the current 737s, and I think have a much longer range. It was a very interesting video actually I watched the other day about the possible benefits of the A321 XLR in terms of doing skinnier international routes. So it'll be interesting to see if Qantas uses them for those as well.
Right, probably got time for one more story.
Gonna squeeze maybe one or two in.
Take that. It's definitely going to be two.
This is something we didn't cover on the website. I just wanted to bring awareness to it because it is a wonderful initiative. Virgin Australia and Adelaide Airport, they've officially launched this Try Before You Fly program. And basically what this does is people with disabilities or other health conditions, it gives them a chance to see what it is like to fly and see what the experience will be like for them without actually getting on a plane.
That's a really good idea because I would imagine as well that there's a lot of people who feel very apprehensive about getting on a flight, and I would imagine the ability to be able to kind of step through it beforehand would actually bring an awful lot of comfort and would probably persuade people who maybe were reticent about flying to actually do it. So I think that's a really, really good idea.
Well, it's not just people who are nervous flyers. So this thing is a full simulated travel experience. So booking, check-in, boarding, sitting on an aircraft. The plane never leaves the gate.
Yeah.
So it's it is designed, according to this release from Virgin, to reduce anxiety and build confidence for individuals who may find flying challenging, including those with disabilities or sensory issues. So it's had a few successful trials, and it's now basically officially launched. According to Stuart Aggs, who's the Chief Risk Officer at Virgin Australia, of the previous round participants, 47% have since chosen to travel by air, which is almost half, which is pretty good. And so it's great, for people with sensory issues, for people with autism, for people with other disabilities who may not have flown before and want to, get a sense of what it will be like for them and whether they can do it.
I think that's a really good initiative. One, obviously, doing these sort of things costs the airline money. This is not something they're doing for profit. It's something they're genuinely doing to make a difference. So I completely applaud that. It is a great initiative.
The other thing, Adam, is do you remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about Jetstar's 21st birthday celebration and the LARP competition?
Yes, I do remember. It was more than a couple of weeks ago. It was a while ago. Could you give a bit of a refresh as to what this involved?
So, Jetstar launched this Night of the Skies competition where you would put on your best medieval costume from household items. And go to Melbourne and fight it out in a big, sort of LARP battle. LARP being live action role playing, so running around hitting each other with foam swords and throwing balls at each other for spells and things like that. Run by Swordcraft, the largest LARPing organisation in Australia. And they held this competition to basically give away $50,000 in flight vouchers. Now, the contestants were divided into two teams, Team Jet and Team Star. Team Jet was the winner of the medieval battle. And the four lucky winners were Genevieve Maisie, Cameron Riches, Nicole Brownlee, and Julian Dodds. So they will be receiving the $50,000 prize. They are sharing that between them. So congratulations to those guys. I think that's $12,500 in flight vouchers for each of them, which is nothing to be sneezed at. Doing some quick maths in my head. Yeah. And it's a great way to. As someone who has LARPed before, it's a great way to get people interested in LARPing who may never have LARPed before, and hopefully they will continue doing that.
Well, yeah, no.
It's a fun hobby, great exercise. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of different LARP groups, at least not the medieval boffer LARP groups in Sydney at the moment. But if you're willing to go a bit further afield, I think there's one which I used to go to called Cicadia, and that's in Rudy Hill. So that's one to maybe look up. But if there's other LARP groups around Australia and other LARP events around Australia. So if you're interested in becoming a Knight of the Ground, go check it out. Live action role playing.
Excellent. Is that it? Have we got anything else?
I think that's about it, Adam.
That's it. All right. That's okay. I thought there'd be like more of a... No, it's a pretty good ending. That was a pretty good ending. Anyway, if you have actually managed to cling on the YouTube to the very end, that's what we want.
No, cling on to space, Adam.
Oh, God. Anyway, tell all your friends. Keep watching, listening, downloading, whatever it is.
And the Aviation Awards. We should probably... remind our listeners of the Aviation Awards, which will be taking place on date.
I've got no idea off the top of my head. At some point soon, a couple of months' time, innit? Well, basically, if they're listening to this, they've almost certainly run out of time to nominate now. Or
but you can still come along.
You can come along
to Aviation's Night of Nights on Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025.
But he says this. So for those of you listening to this, what you don't understand the skullduggery here, because he's got a laptop in front of him and he's gone on the website, right? So he's making out you should know this. Well, I'm looking after Sir, so that's just ridiculous.
Well, Sut should have told you, Adam.
Yeah, well, he's busy, and he needs to be honest. He's been crossing this podcast. Got on, he's crossing his legs. He needs to go outside for a pee, don't you, mate? Yeah, he said. Sorry, I was just having a moment with Sir. Right. Anyway, we'll be back on the show the same time next week. Jake, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
I should have said that a bit before. We'll be back next week. From us, goodbye.